The lat pull down exercise, a common exercise that people do in the gym to train their back and obviously their lats. So let's have a look at this from an anatomical analysis and how to break it down so you can work out exactly what muscles are involved in the lat pull down using an anatomical approach. So as you can see, I've developed a table and I'm going to do this with a number of exercises so you can break it down and systematically be able to work out muscle activation or muscle involvement in any exercise if you use the process. And obviously you need to know your anatomy to do that, or be able to source anatomy knowledge to be able to work out the answer. So the first column, obviously for the lat pull down, is what joints are involved. So to identify the joints. The second is what are those joints doing on the up phase and the down phase. Because normally with weight training there's only really two phases, up and down, because exercises in traditional weight training is performed in one plane. Now understand in sporting movements and more complex movements there might be more three-dimensional multiple planes being used with rotation, all sorts of stuff. Then once you work out what the phases are, work out which phase is the concentric contraction, because it's always easier to do anatomy identification of what muscles are involved when in the concentric, because the eccentric is the same muscle but the joint's working in a reverse action. For example, when I flex my elbow, my bicep flexes my elbow, but under load if I lengthen my elbow joint, the bicep is still lengthening it, it's just controlling the speed of lowering it. So it's still the bicep in the eccentric contraction or elbow extension as there's the bicep in the concentric contraction in elbow flexion. But it's always easier to identify the concentric, because what's the same muscle works the concentric as the same muscle works the eccentric in the lowering phase of the exercise. Then once you've got that, the concentric movement, then work out what muscles are responsible for that concentric movement or contraction that creates that joint action. And then from there you can start to distinguish what are the prime movers, which are the main movers of the movement, and they're generally the bigger muscles of that joint, and the smaller muscles will be the assistant mover. The prime mover is the muscle that mostly contributes to the joint movement, and the assistant muscles are the ones that assist the prime mover. And then look at the important stabilizers that stabilize that joint, so that joint can create that action. So there's no unwanted movement or any sort of supplementary movement that can occur. So let's have a look at the lat pull down. Joints. Now obviously in the lat pull down we're going to do reverse lat pull down or underhand grip with the arms in close. Now what are the obvious joints? I always like to start from the center out or the axial system out. So if we go from the axial system out, we've got the girdle, which is the scapula. So the first joint that moves when you do a lat pull down is the scapula. Now you don't want it moving too much, but there will be a little bit of movement. Then attached to that is the glenohumeral joint, which a lot of people call the shoulder joint. So technically the shoulder joint is made up of two joints, the scapular-thoracic joint, where the scapula sits on the thoracic cage, and the glenohumeral joint, where the humerus attaches to the glenoid cavity to create the glenohumeral joint. And then obviously we all have the elbow joint. So they're the three main joints that are involved in this action. Now, what are they doing? So if you look at, for example, the scapula, you have the up phase would be when your arms go up, and the down phase when your arms come down. All right, so up phase, down phase. So on the up phase, what's the scapula doing? Well, the scapula will tend to, because the load's pulling up, it will tend to elevate the scapula. So there'll be a little bit of scapular elevation. And there might be a little bit of also lateral rotation of the scapula, with the elbows maybe come out a bit, then the scapula will start to wing out a little bit. So there'll be a little bit of lateral rotation and elevation of the scapula. On the way up, the glenohumeral joint, what's it doing? It's actually flexing. So the glenohumeral joint is flexing. The elbow joint is extending. On the way down, it will be obviously the reverse of those actions. So the scapula will be depression with some medial rotation where it comes into the center line. The glenohumeral joint will be extending and the elbow will be flexing. So which is the concentric phase? The concentric phase is basically where the muscle is overcoming the load, where the muscle is winning. So when you're pulling down and the weights are being lifted up, that would be the concentric phase, when there's active shortening of the muscle to overcome a load, where eccentric is the active lengthening of a muscle, and that would be to control the load in the lowering phase. So in this case, the concentric movement is the lowering phase. So what muscles are responsible for those joints in that phase? So if you look at the scapula, if you're looking at from here on the lie down, you've got to be depression and medial rotation. So what depresses the scapula? Well, it will be obviously be your trapezius, particularly your lower fibers trapezius that originate on your vertebral column and insert onto your spine of scapula. So your lower trapezius, that would also be assisted by your rhomboids, which is more of an adductor, but at the same time it actually helps medially rotate the scapula. So trapezius, lower fibers, rhomboids, and from the front what you don't see is your serratus anterior, which starts in your ribs and inserts onto the underbelly of the scapula that helps pull it down, or the lateral border of the scapula that also pulls it down. So it gets pulled down from the back and the front by your trapezius, lower fibers, your rhomboids, and more from the front, your serratus anterior. So they're the muscles that will depress and medially rotate the scapula. How about shoulder extension? What muscles extend the shoulder? Well, the obvious one is your latissimus dorsi and its little brother teres major. They would also be assisted by your deltoids and also your long-headed tricep that starts in the lateral border of your scapula and inserts into your humerus. So for those, the prime mover would be latissimus dorsi because it's the bigger one, and the other ones would be the assistant movers. When it comes to the scapular depression, a prime mover in that would be your lower fibrous trapezius because it's a large muscle, and the assistant muscles will be the other ones which I also mentioned. And when it comes to elbow flexion, what flexes the elbow? The obvious one is biceps brachii, we all talk about that one, but you also have that's assisted by your brachialis and your brachioradialis. So the prime mover in elbow flexion would be biceps brachii, and the assistant movers would be brachialis, which sits underneath, and your brachioradialis, which is here on your forearm, but is also goes across the elbow joint to flex the elbow joint. Now we've looked at the major muscles and the assistant muscles that are responsible for those joint movements. What are the stabilizers? We talked about the stabilizer joints so the prime movers and assistant movers can work more efficiently and effectively. So if you look at the scapula, the scapula itself, the stabilizers, the trapezius, the rhomboids and the serratus anterior, they are actually stabilizers, but they also play a separate role as movers, so they're moving stabilizers. So when it comes to the scapula, those stabilizers are the same muscles, but they're actually moving and trying to control the movement and stabilize the joint while it's moving, so it provides a good platform for the other joints and muscles to work off. When it comes to the glenohumeral joint, the stabilizers will be the deltoid, which is also involved in the movement itself, but it also has a role as stabilizing while it's actually helping moving. So it's sort of moving and stabilizing in a dynamic way at the same time. And at a deeper level, you have your stabilizers called the rotator cuff muscles. The rotator cuff muscles, they originate on the scapula and they insert into the head of the humerus, and there's four of them: your supraspinatus, your infraspinatus, your teres minor, and your subscapularis, and all of them work very hard to maintain a good connection between the head of the humerus and the glenoid cavity, to keep those two articulating surfaces with good connection and good control while your other muscles work. So they're the stabilizers for the glenohumeral joint, and the stabilizers for the elbow joint. It doesn't really need a lot of stabilizers because the elbow joint is a hinge joint and it has a set plane movement and it's pretty well controlled by the ligaments. It can't really go out of alignment, unlike the scapula, which can move everywhere, or the glenohumeral joint, which is a ball and socket joint. It can move everywhere, so it needs stabilizing to get it moving in one plane when it can move in every plane. But the elbow can only work in one plane because it's a hinge joint. So when it comes to stabilizers for the elbow, there's not a huge stabilizing effect, except maybe a bit of assistance from the bicep to keep the two bones in connection so the tricep doesn't pull one bone forward off the other. So there you have a basically anatomical analysis, and when you start to be able to work that out, then you can start to work out how the muscles roles and their functions change when you look at different exercises or different variations of the same exercise, because there might be a slightly different emphasis. So take that on board. Once you know that, no matter what the exercise is given to you, put on your plate, you can put it through the exercise analysis process or the anatomical analysis, and you always work out the correct answer of exactly what muscles are involved in the overall exercise when it comes to prime movers, assistant movers, and stabilizers. See you in the next exercise.